Hello, I'm Henry Keane, and Creative English is online to give you the Ukrainian perspective of reality. Watch in the episode. More American Patriots for Patriots of Ukraine. Is it happening already? Have some fun. Watch Sergei Lavrov's collection of fake Ukrainian quotes. Europe is at moral decay according to Russian propaganda, still a better place for vacation for their propaganda anchors than Mother Russia. For starters, although not without problems, but the European Union has finally made it. It was able to approve the 18th package of sanctions. Well, don't believe me, just watch. The fact that the ambassadors of the member states of the Union approved it was reported by Radio Liberty EU correspondent Richard Józwiak. Further steps, as practice shows, are rather more formal, so in the near future Russia will face new, quite severe restrictions from the United Europe.
We are standing firm. The EU just approved one of its strongest sanctions package against Russia to date. We're cutting the Kremlin's war budget further, going after 105 more Shadow Fleet ships, their enablers, and limiting Russian banks' access to funding. Kaja Kallas, EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, on social network X.
Well, let's do a close-up at these restrictions, shall we? First things first, oil price cap will be lowering the price limit for Russian oil, obviously. Now, the maximum price is $47.5 instead of $60 as it was before. Also, direct sanctions applied onto 105 ships of the Shadow Fleet of Russia, which, taking into account the previous packages of restrictions, brings the number of ships directly sanctioned by the European Union to 500. At the same time, the monitoring screws of sorts for these illegal tankers is also being tightened. Thus, a blacklist register will be created. In addition, the 18th package includes restrictions on 22 banks and the largest Russian oil refinery in India. Now, India, which has traditionally bought Russian oil, will have a harder time with this now. The new restrictions were obviously supported by the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky.
The 18th sanctions package continues to target Russia's tanker fleet, not only the vessels themselves, but also the captains of the Shadow Fleet and the companies enabling such oil-financed acts of killing. We will continue applying this pressure. The European Union is also imposing a stricter price cap on Russian oil, around $46 per barrel. In coordination with other global partners, we will continue working to ensure that the price cap truly cuts Russia's revenues. This is possible. We already know how to effectively exert this pressure. Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine, on social network X.
All good, but not too good. The Reuters news agency reports that there is a problem with the oil price cap for Russian oil. This is a restriction originally defined by the G7 countries. So, after all, who's in G7 family is going to control it is actually working? It is not known which institution should do the management, as there is no such institution. Also, the key ally in the sanctions, the United States, refused to lower the price cap, apparently due to Donald Trump's policy of appeasing Russian terror instead of fighting it. Another interesting fact is that this package of sanctions was blocked for almost a month by Putin's friends within the European Union, Hungary and Slovakia, of course. And if Orban has long since withdrawn his claims, then Robert Fico 3 days ago loud and clear declared that he would not allow the EU to accept these restrictions, word to word copy-pasting the Kremlin's propaganda mantra, sanctions harm Europe more than Russia. Well, all these human values seem to just fade out, whereas self-interest fade in, right? But what is sold can be bought, right? Slovakia stopped blocking the 18th package of anti-Russian sanctions as soon as received gas price guarantees from the EU. Right, well, what's with that sanctions harm Europe more than Russia slogan, Comrade Fico?
At this point, dear friends, it would be counterproductive to continue blocking the 18th sanctions package tomorrow. All options for negotiations have been exhausted for now, and continuing in our blocking position would already threaten our interests.
Back to our muttons. Russia circumvents restrictions on oil sales, selling it to Asia. India. That's right. However, India will be able to replace Russian oil. This was stated by Indian Oil Minister Hardeep Singh Puri. Earlier, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte warned Brazil, India and China of US sanctions for doing oil business with Russia. I'm talking about that bill on secondary sanctions which the US Congress intends to approve. My colleague Kristina Dombrovska will talk you through the thing.
India will be able to address any issues with Russian imports by turning to suppliers such as Brazil and Canada, stated India's oil minister Hardeep Singh Puri. He noted that many new suppliers, like Guyana, are emerging on the market. He added that his country is increasing its geological exploration and production efforts.
My own view is the price of oil will come down. It will come down, madam, only because there is more oil available in the international market. There is more oil coming on the global market from the Western Hemisphere. I mean countries like Brazil, Guyana, Canada, they're not even OPEC plus members. I'm not worried at all. If something happens, we'll deal with it.
Currently, 35% of India's oil imports come from Russia, followed by Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. In the event of U.S. sanctions, New Delhi plans to reduce the share of Russian oil imports to 2%, as it was before the war in Ukraine, according to Arvind Singh Sahni, chairman of the Indian Oil Corporation. These statements from India followed NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte's recent warning that India, Brazil, and China could face severe consequences from U.S. secondary sanctions. Specifically, he urged all three countries to persuade Putin to take peace negotiations seriously.
Line with that sanctions bill saying, listen, if you are the president of China or the prime minister of India or the president of Brazil and you are still trading with the Russians and getting the oil and the gas in and you sometimes even resell it for a higher price, know that if this guy in Moscow doesn't get serious about peace talks, I will slam secondary sanctions on you of 100%. So I'm sure they don't know yet what hit them. This will take some time to sink in.
Mark Rutte made this statement during a meeting with U.S. senators in Congress, a day after U.S. President Donald Trump announced new weapons for Ukraine and threatened 100% secondary tariffs on countries still trading with Russia if Moscow does not reach a peace agreement within 50 days. Republican Senator John Kennedy, speaking in Congress, stated that the only way to stop the war in Ukraine is to cut off Russia's oil sales, which account for at least a third and possibly up to 40% of Russia's budget revenue. He emphasized that there is no other choice.
Our bill would not only sanction Russia and its sale of oil, but it would sanction everybody who buys Russian oil. Big difference. If you want to buy Russian oil, have at it. Knock yourself out. But you're not going to be able to do business with America. And you're not going to be able to use the American dollar, which is the world's currency, to do business in America. It will put Putin on his knees within 3 months. And he won't have any choice but to come to the bargaining table.
The U.S. president could end the war in Ukraine by the end of the year, stated Andriy Yermak, head of the Ukrainian president's office. In an interview with the Times podcast, he added that since the beginning of 2025, oil prices have enabled Putin to finance his war machine, Yermak emphasized.
The threat of secondary sanctions will work because it will also put pressure on China and India, two of Russia's largest fossil fuel importers, to push for a deal to avoid their own new trade wars with the White House. Andriy Yermak, head of the office of the President of Ukraine, in an interview on the Times podcast.
In 2024, according to the International Energy Agency, Russia exported over 8 million barrels per day, surpassed only by Saudi Arabia, and the U.S. analysts predict that the global oil market in 2025 will be in surplus, with supply exceeding demand by at least 1 million barrels per day, roughly half of Russia's exports to India. According to Reuters, the price of Russian oil is already falling short of the target set in the Federation's 2025 budget.
The average price of Russia's oil blend in the first 2 weeks of July, around steady with June's level, but 11.1% below the updated budget's target. This adds pressure to the budget that already faces a rising deficit, from a publication by Reuters.
Previously, Russia's finance ministry reported that the budget deficit in the first half of the year had already exceeded $47 billion, equivalent to about 2% of GDP. According to The Times, Donald Trump is considering a global oil embargo against Russia to cripple Putin's war economy. Reported by Kristina Dombrovska, UATV News.
Direct military aid from the Allies to Ukraine. Let's talk about that. Now, after Donald Trump's announcement on Monday that the United States would resume arms supply to Ukraine, it, why am I not surprised, has not yet begun. On one hand, yes, this is not a matter of hours. Of course, the entire logistics chain must be restarted. On the other hand, try walking our Ukrainian shoes and spend a night in Kiev or Zaporizhia or Kharkiv. So feel yourself, every hour counts, let alone 50 days, right? Well, nevertheless, according to US side, they are doing everything possible to speed up the process.
We are all moving with haste to facilitate this and get this done. And you know, I think things are actually moving very quickly, but I can't verify a date that this will all be completed. Matthew Whitaker, US Ambassador to NATO.
A separate thing is the supply of Patriot air defense systems to Ukraine, which are absolutely crucial for Ukraine to protect itself against Russian terrorism. It is still not entirely clear how many they are and will be and when they will arrive actually in Ukraine. Work is underway, yes, but thus the Swiss Ministry of Defense reports that the supply of Patriot systems first to them is being postponed due to a change in the Pentagon's priorities in favor of strengthening Ukrainian air defense, whatever that means. At the same time, it is already more or less clear who's from European allies pays for the systems, as after France's fundamental refusal to do so, there were some doubts initially, but Germany, Norway, the Netherlands, Denmark and Sweden have expressed their willingness to step in.
We're working very closely with the Germans on the Patriot transfer, and the guidance that I've been given has been to move out as quickly as possible. So we're doing that, and then we're also looking at other capabilities and what those needs are, and working on proposals for our political leadership. So I don't have a good sense of what the numbers will be, but I know that my guidance is to get the Ukrainians what they need to defend themselves. So there'll be a lot more to follow. We're going to move as quickly as we can on this. A ton of coordination in work, but as I mentioned, we're already in the preparation phase for the first tranche of capability to start moving with respect to Patriots.
Sure, according to Grinkiewicz, he does not say aloud the number of Patriots that are planned to be transferred to Ukraine so as not to disclose this information to Russia. I understand that, but the representative of Germany went into some more specifics. Still, obviously, only part of what is going to be sent is being discussed.
If you recall the genesis, originally 2 Patriot systems were also requested by the German Chancellor in the telephone conversation, and the German Chancellor spoke to the American President again on Friday. And in the course of these talks, which went on for more than a week, the number increased. Now we are, according to the American view, talking about more than 2 systems, and the needs of Ukraine are, as you rightly say, higher.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
As the US ramps up its military aid supply chains, another of Ukraine's ally has announced stepping in firmly. Ukraine will soon receive long-range systems, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has announced. He made the statement following a meeting in London with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Merz emphasized that the delivery of these long-awaited systems will put Ukraine in a significantly stronger position to defend its land. Keir Starmer called for Putin to start peace talks and end the fighting as soon as possible, which we all know is highly unlikely to happen. Still, manners maketh man, right? I guess.
Of course, we spoke in detail about military support for Ukraine, not only about air defense, but also about Ukraine's ability to better defend itself with long-range systems. We call this long-range fire. Ukraine will soon receive substantial additional support in this area, including through industrial partnerships that we have established with Ukraine.
First thing we need to do is to get Putin to the table for an unconditional ceasefire. And that is why we've been talking for some time about peace through strength. And that is why we must provide Ukraine with the capability it needs to be in the strongest possible position, and hence the intense work in recent days and weeks on capability.
Also, Poland is working on more arms deliveries to Ukraine, said Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski at the Lublin Triangle Summit. He recalled that Warsaw had provided Kyiv with as much as 45 different arms packages July 16th. The heads of diplomatic missions of Ukraine, Lithuania and Poland met in Lublin on the occasion of the 5th anniversary of these formats. The main topics of the diplomats' talks were security and further support for Ukraine. More details in the reportage for you.
Military support for Ukraine, defense cooperation, and investments in Ukraine's military-industrial complex were discussed at the Lublin Triangle Summit by the foreign ministers of Poland, Lithuania, and Ukraine. This was announced by Ukraine's Foreign Minister Andrii Sybiha on July 16th. He emphasized the importance of continuing trilateral cooperation in military and defense spheres.
EU and NATO tools, scaling up Ukrainian strength through partners' support. In addition to pressuring Russia and raising the cost for the Russian aggressor, we must simultaneously strengthen Ukraine. Our security is indivisible from European security. Our countries have a unique example of military cooperation, and Radek mentioned today that the Lithuanian-Polish-Ukrainian Brigade has been making a significant contribution to training Ukrainian command staff and integrating NATO standards into Ukraine's armed forces for 10 years.
The diplomats also supported the need for joint efforts to counter Russian hybrid threats. Sybiha noted, particularly in cybersecurity, energy security, and countering Russia's use of energy as a tool of geopolitical pressure and blackmail.
Together, we must force Russia to seek peace through strength. It only understands strength together with the US and the entire Euro-Atlantic community. Today, with our Polish and Lithuanian friends, we discussed and agreed on very specific steps in this direction. In particular, joint work on the swift adoption of the EU's 18th sanctions package and preparing new proposals to increase sanctions pressure on the aggressor.
Regarding the 18th sanctions package against Russia, Poland's Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski is optimistic. According to him, negotiations in Brussels are ongoing. He stressed that the meeting with colleagues within the Lublin Triangle framework aims to further strengthen cooperation between Warsaw, Kiev, and Vilnius, especially on security issues. The Polish foreign minister also condemned Russia's massive attacks on civilian cities. As a reminder, on the night of July 16th, a drone attack in Vinnytsia damaged a Polish enterprise, with casualties reported. Kramatorsk, Kharkiv, and Kryvyi Rih were also targeted by Russian forces.
The fact that Russians are trying to destroy Ukrainian industry is not new, but it remains a war crime because it is an attack on civilian targets. We must achieve parity with Russia. We must surpass Russia in the production of weapons that will give us an advantage on the battlefield. We are putting pressure on Russia, seeing that this can stop Putin and force him to change his decision and end the aggression. We hope an agreement on the 18th sanctions package will be reached. The conference in Rome on Ukraine's recovery, the EU Foreign Affairs Council meeting, or any other gatherings where we come together, these topics are the most pressing today. They do not change. And the most critical is the long-term, sustainable support for Ukraine.
In the final communiqué, the diplomats reaffirmed their unwavering support for Ukraine's path to membership in the European Union and NATO as an integral part of Europe's security, stability, and prosperity architecture. The foreign ministers of Ukraine, Poland, and Lithuania expressed their readiness to facilitate the next meeting of the country's presidents in Kyiv. Poland's new president, Karol Nawrocki, who will take office in early August, is expected to attend. The Lublin Triangle, a trilateral regional cooperation platform established in 2020 in Lublin, aims to strengthen political, economic, social, and cultural cooperation between Poland, Ukraine, and Lithuania. Reported by Kristina Dombrovska, UATV News.
Against the backdrop of more support for Ukraine finally coming from its allies, one cannot help oneself but recall what's with the other side. With the Russians, that's right. How are they trying to stop this? And the Kremlin is trying, trust me. Moscow has been trying to pressure the EU and the United States with tsunami of propaganda and truly Orwellian substitution all the time. Russian propaganda might be dull and clumsy and cruel and whatever, but it is abundant. Thus, on the eve of Donald Trump's announcement of a famous or infamous, such yourself, 50-day ultimatum to Russia and the resumption of arms supplies to Kiev, one of Putin's closest associates, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, tried to apply some more pressure at the US administration. At a long-awaited meeting on the sidelines of ASEAN summit in Kuala Lumpur, with US State Department Secretary Marco Rubio, Lavrov handed him what he called a document, the document maybe even. In it were quotes of Ukrainian politicians in which they're calling for killing Russians. There is not a single piece of evidence or proof that these quotes were not simply invented by Lavrov and his pals, but that is okay, nothing new. Instead of constructive dialogue towards peace, the Kremlin always and has once again demonstrated its unwillingness to meet the peace even halfway. And the long list of false statements attributed to representatives of the Ukrainian government is a firm proof of exactly that.
This is yet another element of Kremlin manipulation aimed at strengthening the propaganda rhetoric about alleged terrorism on the part of Ukraine. Such tactics further escalate the conflict and demonstrate that Russia does not strive for peace, but is looking for new ways to justify its aggressive actions. Instead of looking for real ways to cease fire, the Russian Federation continues to manipulate the international community. From the report of the Center for Counteracting Disinformation under the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine.
Well, not all mouthpieces of Kremlin propaganda have been caught by the sanctions of the European Union. According to the Russian bodyguard database, which was studied by the publication The Insider, more than 70 Russian propagandists just calmly go to Europe for vacations. Moreover, some of them own real estate in, as per their own words, decaying and degrading Europe. But it is still good enough for their vacation. More of that by my colleague Yulia Granovska.
The United States, as well as European cities like Amsterdam, Barcelona, and Venice. However, Paris is particularly favored by propagandist Anatoly Kuzychev. He has vacationed there most frequently in recent years. The question arises, how can one person reconcile a love for the Louvre, croissants, and foie gras with a fervent desire to vilify all French people, including President Emmanuel Macron? For example, this is how he commented on the Bastille Day parade.
Amusing, the horses decided to stage a protest on Bastille Day. One slipped and fell along with its rider. Another ran off during the march, probably to avoid embarrassment. Sometimes it feels like European countries are holding a flash mob called Who Can Mess Up the Most. And this is by no means just about parades and horses. Anatoly Kuzychev, Russian propagandist, on Telegram.
Spain is another country of the so-called decaying West, as Kremlin mouthpieces love to say. Here, in between their main job, fiercely fighting democratic Europe, the leadership of the NTV channel likes to vacation. Indeed, why go to Sochi when you can head to your penthouse in Barcelona? Journalists from The Insider discovered that top manager of the Gazprom media holding, Mikhail Demin, owns property in Spain.
The Insider was able to confirm that Demin owns 4 properties in Spain, a penthouse in Barcelona, a house in Blanes near Girona, and both an apartment and a villa with a pool in the Catalonia region's Lloret de Mar. Demin is not under European Union sanctions, while Gazprom Media has been sanctioned by the United States and Canada for its role in promoting Kremlin propaganda and disinformation. It remains untouched by the EU. The broadcasts of some of its channels, however, have been restricted in a number of EU countries, largely due to the holding company's affiliation with Gazprom Bank, which is under European sanctions, from a publication by The Insider.
Meanwhile, Alexander Zharov, former head of Roskomnadzor, prefers to vacation with his family in Italy. He has frequently visited Rome, Naples, and Pisa. A regular participant in the propaganda talk show Evening with Vladimir Solovyov, head of the Mosfilm studio Karen Shakhnazarov, enjoys vacationing in Cyprus. His leisure is funded by following the Kremlin's playbook. Among his recent statements, I quote, "The West wants to destabilize Russia from within." He also promotes another Kremlin agenda, calling on Russian football players to go to the front and fight against Ukraine.
If your homeland is in danger, and it is in danger, it's like a mother. And if she's in danger, no matter how you feel, do something to save her.
Overall, according to data from Russia's border service studied by the Insider journalists, the most popular vacation destinations for Russian propagandists remain France, Italy, Spain, Greece, Germany, Croatia, and Cyprus. Traveling to European Union countries does not stop them from proclaiming on Russian television screens about the West's decay, rampant Russophobia, and the absence of so-called Russian traditional values. Meanwhile, the Russian propaganda machine systematically fabricates the appearance of international support for Kremlin policies.
Propaganda deliberately seeks out pro-Russia texts on Chinese blog platforms and then presents them as the stance of reputable publications. This happened with reports following the NATO summit in The Hague. The NATO summit in The Hague was a victory for Russia, pro-Kremlin outlets reported, citing supposed Chinese media from a publication by Mojem Obyaznit on Telegram.
To create the illusion of international support for Moscow's policies, propagandists most often use half-truths or fragments of real statements, taking quotes out of context and distorting their meaning. Reported by Yulia Hranovska, UATV News.
Well, thanks a lot. It was it for today. My name is Henry Keane. We are UATV Weekly, giving you the Ukrainian perspective of reality. Please join, like, comment, subscribe. Hope to see you with us on the right side of history. Stay tuned and see you soon. Goodbye.